Before we get into the video, could everyone please subscribe to my Endless Diary Tales channel? Thank you so much. My father, Victor Sterling, CEO of Sterling Industries, a man who built his empire on calculated risks and ruthless ambition, saw me as nothing more than an insurance policy. Isabel was the heir apparent, the golden child destined to inherit his throne. I was the spare, the afterthought, the one he kept tucked away just in case. "Elena, darling," my mother would say, her voice dripping with faux concern, "why don't you try a little harder? Isabel manages to excel in both her studies and her social life. You simply must apply yourself." Such a disappointment. I'd hear her say, her carefully Botoxed brow furrowing in disapproval. "She'll never be the asset Isabel is." Victor's disdain was even more blatant. "Elena," he'd bark, his voice booming through the opulent study, "your quarterly report is abysmal. Isabel would have doubled these figures by now." "Useless," he'd say, his eyes filled with a chilling indifference. "She's a Sterling in name only." I excelled in my studies, mastering the intricacies of finance and business strategy, but my efforts were met with indifference, my accomplishments overshadowed by Isabel's every frivolous achievement. She was the social butterfly, the darling of the society pages, while I was relegated to the sidelines, a shadow in my own home. Then came the mistake, a critical error in judgment on Isabel's part. A risky investment that threatened to bring the entire Sterling empire crashing down. I saw it coming, the warning signs flashing like neon lights in the company's financial reports. I tried to warn my father, to present him with an alternative strategy, a way to mitigate the damage, but he wouldn't listen. He saw only Isabel, his golden child, his perfect creation. He dismissed my concerns, waved away my warnings, and accused me of jealousy, of trying to sabotage my sister's success. "You're just bitter, Elena," he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "You've always been jealous of Isabel's talent, her drive, her ability to shine. She's trying to undermine her sister," he thought, his eyes filled with disgust. Ungrateful wretch. And when the inevitable happened, when the investment collapsed and Sterling Industries teetered on the brink of ruin, he didn't hesitate. He threw me under the bus, blamed me for the company's losses, and disowned me, severing all ties, cutting me off without a penny. "You're no daughter of mine," he spat, his voice venomous. "Get out of my sight and don't ever come back." I left with nothing but the clothes on my back, and the bitter taste of betrayal in my mouth. The Sterling mansion, the gilded cage that had been my prison, was no longer my home. I was adrift, alone, cast out by the family I had tried to save. And then, as the world crumbled around me, as Sterling Industries finally collapsed under the weight of Isabel's mistakes, as my father and sister lost everything, I died alone, penniless, abandoned by the people who were supposed to love me. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. The sterile scent of antiseptic, the rhythmic keeping of a heart monitor, it was a familiar scene yet utterly disorienting. I blinked my eyes, adjusting to the harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital room. Memories flooded back, a chaotic jumble of emotions, betrayal, despair, the chilling indifference of my family. But something was different. The gnawing emptiness in my stomach was gone. My body felt whole. I looked down at my hands, no longer skeletal and frail but strong and youthful. I stumbled to the mirror, my reflection staring back at me with wide, disbelieving eyes. It was me, but younger, healthier, alive. I was back in time, 2 years before the catastrophic investment, 2 years before my father would cast me aside like a broken toy, 2 years before the Sterling Empire would crumble, taking my family down with it. A wave of dizziness washed over me, the reality of my situation hitting me with the force of a tidal wave. I wasn't dead. I had been given a second chance, a chance to rewrite the script, to change the ending, to play the game on my own terms. This time, I wouldn't be the dutiful daughter, the sacrificial lamb. This time, I wouldn't waste my breath trying to warn them, trying to save them from their own arrogance and greed. 2 years to prepare, 2 years to dismantle their empire brick by agonizing brick. This time, I wouldn't try to save them. I'd let them crash and burn. A cold, hard determination settled in my gut, replacing the fear and despair that had once consumed me. I would use my knowledge of the future, my understanding of their weaknesses, to orchestrate their downfall. I would play the obedient daughter, the naive pawn, while secretly plotting my revenge. I would watch as Isabel, the golden child, made the same disastrous decisions, digging the grave for their empire. I would listen as my father, blinded by his pride and his misplaced faith in his favorite daughter, dismissed my concerns, scoffed at my warnings, and then when the time was right, I would strike. I would use their own weapons against them, their own greed and ambition, their undoing. I would turn the tables, become the master of my own fate, the architect of their destruction. The plush offices of Goldman Sachs were a far cry from the sterile environment of the hospital room. I sat across the mahogany desk from Mr. Davenport, a man whose reputation as a shrewd investor was only surpassed by his air of bored indifference. He looked at me, his eyes scanning my conservative suit, my neatly pulled back hair, my carefully neutral expression. "Miss Sterling," he began, his voice smooth and condescending, "your request is unconventional. A loan of this magnitude for someone with your limited experience." Another pawn in my father's game, I heard him think, his eyes flickering with disdain. "She's probably just trying to fund another frivolous shopping spree." I smiled, a small controlled movement of my lips. "Mr. Davenport, I assure you my intentions are far from frivolous. This is a calculated investment, a strategic move based on extensive research and a deep understanding of the market." "Oh really?" he thought, his skepticism evident. "And what, pray tell, is this brilliant strategy based on?"
"Daddy's insider tips."
"I'd prefer to keep the details confidential," I said, my voice firm and confident. "But I can assure you the returns will be substantial for both of us." I slid a folder across the table, a meticulously crafted presentation outlining my financial projections, my risk assessment, and my exit strategy. It was a masterpiece of deception, a carefully constructed illusion designed to appeal to his greed while concealing my true motives. My true motives of using the money to short my father's company stocks, essentially betting on its failure, a bet that would make me extremely rich. He scanned the document, his eyebrows rising in surprise. "This is impressive," he thought, his initial skepticism giving way to a flicker of interest. "She's done her homework. There might be something to this after all." But what he saw wasn't the whole picture. He saw a quiet, unassuming woman asking for a loan. I was playing a part, a carefully crafted performance for an audience of one, my father. The loan was approved, the funds transferred to a newly created offshore account, hidden behind layers of shell corporations and anonymous transactions. I repeated the process with other banks, securing a vast fortune, a war chest to fuel my campaign against the Sterling Empire. My father, oblivious to my movements, continued to bask in his arrogance, his blind faith in Isabel's abilities. He saw me as a pawn, a disposable asset to be discarded at his whim. He had no idea that I was the one playing the game, the one pulling the strings, the one orchestrating his downfall. The meticulous planning continued. I researched rival companies, identified their strengths and weaknesses, and strategically invested in their success. I gathered information, whispers of discontent, rumors of instability within Sterling Industries, and used that knowledge to manipulate the market, to sow the seeds of doubt that would eventually lead to their collapse. I was a ghost in their world, a silent predator stalking its prey. They saw me as nothing, a harmless shadow, a forgotten daughter. They had no idea that I was the storm gathering on the horizon, the force that would soon shatter their world. Isabel, with her designer wardrobe and her entourage of sycophants, was a walking, talking financial disaster. Her business acumen was limited to picking the most expensive champagne at shareholder meetings and charming investors with her dazzling smile. She was also my ticket to a fortune. I simply had to sit back and watch her self-destruct. "Elin, darling," she'd simper, her voice dripping with condescension. "Why don't you leave the important decisions to those of us who actually understand business?" "She's such an idiot," I'd hear her think, her thoughts a whirlwind of self-admiration and disdain for anyone she deemed beneath her. "Daddy will never let her take over the company. It'll be mine." Someday I played the role of the dutiful daughter, the supportive sister, offering praise for her disastrous ideas, nodding along to her nonsensical plans. I watched as she poured millions into failing ventures, seduced by the promises of quick returns and blinded by her own arrogance. "This new acquisition is going to be huge, Elena," she gushed, her eyes sparkling with misplaced confidence. "Just wait and see." I'll be making headlines, and I'll be laughing all the way to the bank. I think, a smirk playing on my lips. The bigger they are, the harder they fall. My father, blinded by his love for Isabel, saw only her ambition, her drive. He dismissed her failures as minor setbacks, temporary bumps on the road to success. He couldn't see the gaping chasm that was opening beneath their feet, the financial abyss that was about to swallow them whole. Isabel has a knack for taking risks, he'd say, his voice filled with pride. She's a true Sterling, bold, fearless, and destined for greatness. She's going to bankrupt us all. I'd think, a shiver of anticipation running down my spine. And I'll be there to pick up the pieces. I watched as the company's profits dwindled, as investors grew wary, as the whispers of doubt began to circulate in the financial press. Isabel, oblivious to the impending doom, continued her reckless spending, her lavish parties, her extravagant lifestyle. The stage was set, the pieces were in place. All that remained was to wait for the final act, the inevitable collapse of the House of Sterling. And I, Elena Sterling, the forgotten daughter, the discarded heir, would be there to witness it all, a silent observer, a secret beneficiary of their downfall. The mahogany desk in my father's study was a battlefield. The Disown papers, the declaration of war. He sat across from me, his face a mask of cold fury, his eyes burning with the righteous anger that was as misplaced as it was intense. "Elena," he boomed, his voice echoing through the opulent room. "You have betrayed this family. Your actions, your blatant disregard for our legacy, have left me with no choice." He slid the papers across the desk, the crisp white sheets a stark contrast to the dark wood. "Sign this," he commanded, his voice brooking no argument. "Sever all ties with this family. You are no longer a Sterling." I looked at the document, the legalese swirling before my eyes. It was a finality, a severance, a complete and utter rejection. And yet, I couldn't help but feel a flicker of amusement. He thinks he's punishing me, I thought, a smirk playing on my lips. He thinks he's leaving me with nothing. I let a single tear roll down my cheek, a carefully crafted display of hurt and betrayal. "Father," I whispered, my voice trembling. "How can you do this to me? I tried to warn you to save the company." "Lies," he roared, slamming his fist on the desk. "You were jealous of Isabel. You wanted to see her fail. You wanted to destroy everything we've built." He's so predictable, I thought, my amusement growing. He can't see past his own delusions. I signed the document, the papers in my hand steady, my resolve unwavering. The Disown was a formality, a theatrical gesture that meant nothing to me. I was already gone, already free. He watched me, his eyes filled with smug satisfaction. He thought he was cutting me off, thought he was leaving me with nothing. He couldn't have been more wrong. As he signed the Disown papers, I was already counting my future millions, the loan I had secured, the investments I had made, the carefully orchestrated plan that was about to unfold. It was all falling into place. The Sterling empire was about to crumble, and I, Elena Sterling, the disposable daughter, the forgotten heir, would be the one to profit from its demise. The irony was delicious, a sweet revenge served cold. I left the study, my head held high, my footsteps echoing through the silent mansion. The gilded cage was open, and I was finally free. The world was my oyster, and I, Elena Sterling, the woman they had discarded, was about to claim my pearl. The Disown was my liberation. Free from the suffocating confines of the Sterling mansion, I could finally move without constraint, my actions cloaked in secrecy, my motives hidden behind a veil of anonymity. While my family reveled in their ignorance, I was building my empire. My first move was swift and decisive. With the millions I had secured through loans and careful investments, I shorted Sterling Industries stock. It was a bold move, a calculated gamble against my own family, but I knew their weaknesses, their vulnerabilities. I knew their empire was built on a foundation of sand, ready to crumble at the slightest tremor. The initial investment was just the beginning. I diversified my portfolio, spreading my wealth across a network of shell corporations and offshore accounts, making my movements untraceable, my motives obscured. I became a phantom, a whisper in the financial markets, my influence growing with each passing day. While they were busy squandering their inheritance, I was building my own, quietly, discreetly. I was becoming a force to be reckoned with. I invested in rival companies, carefully selecting those poised to capitalize on Sterling Industries' inevitable decline. I funded their research, supported their expansion, and watched as their market share grew, slowly chipping away at my father's empire. I manipulated the market, spreading rumors, leaking information, creating ripples of doubt that eroded investor confidence in Sterling Industries. I watched as their stock price fluctuated, a heartbeat growing weaker with each passing day. And when the opportunity arose, I struck. I bought out struggling businesses, companies that had once been part of the Sterling Empire, now discarded and undervalued. I restructured them, streamlined their operations, and turned them into profitable ventures, adding to my growing wealth and influence. My network expanded. I cultivated relationships with influential figures in the business world, people who saw me not as the disgraced Sterling daughter, but as a rising star. Root investor with a Midas touch, I became a sought-after advisor. My insights valued, my opinions respected. The Sterling name, once a symbol of power and prestige, was now tarnished, its luster fading with each passing day. My father, blinded by his arrogance, couldn't see the writing on the wall. He was a king on a sinking ship, oblivious to the storm raging around him. And I, Elena Sterling, the daughter he had cast aside, was the architect of his destruction. I was the silent force, the invisible hand guiding the market, shaping the future, and building my own empire on the ashes of theirs. The day the Sterling stock began its free fall was a symphony of chaos. The trading floor was a cacophony of shouts and frantic gestures, the air thick with tension and the scent of fear. I sat in my private office, a world away from the pandemonium, a glass of champagne in my hand, my eyes glued to the stock ticker. Each plummeting point was a note in the symphony of their destruction. It was beautiful. The whispers had become a roar. The rumors I had planted, the seeds of doubt I had sown, had blossomed into full-blown panic. Investors, once eager to be associated with the Sterling name, were now scrambling to distance themselves, their confidence shattered, their portfolios bleeding red. My father, his face pale and drawn, was a general on a losing battlefield. He barked orders, issued press releases, and made desperate pleas to his dwindling allies, but the tide had turned. The Sterling Empire, once an unassailable fortress, was crumbling before his eyes. "We need to stabilize the stock," he roared, his voice hoarse with desperation. "Buy back shares, issue a dividend, do whatever it takes." Too little, too late, I thought, a smirk playing on my lips. The vultures are circling, and they can smell the blood in the water. Isabel, her designer clothes and forced smile doing little to hide her panic, was a shadow of her former self. The golden child, the heir apparent, was now facing the consequences of her incompetence, the reality of her own impending ruin. "This can't be happening," she whimpered, her voice cracking. "Daddy, we have to do something. You should have listened to me." I thought, a flicker of satisfaction in my eyes. "But you were too busy playing princess to pay attention to the real world." The stock ticker continued its relentless descent, each drop a hammer blow to their dwindling fortune. I watched, mesmerized, as their empire crumbled, their legacy reduced to a series of numbers on a screen. And then when the time was right, I made my move. I cashed out my short positions, reaping a fortune from their misfortune. The millions I had invested, the seeds I had sown, had blossomed into a harvest of wealth and power. The Sterling stockade, once a symbol of their dominance, was now a graveyard of their ambition. And I, Elena Sterling, the daughter they had discarded, was the sole inheritor of their downfall. Isabel's world was collapsing. The designer clothes, the lavish parties, the adoring fans, all gone. She was just a spoiled brat facing the consequences of her own stupidity. The mansion, once a playground for her whims, now echoed with the silence of their dwindling fortune. The servants, once eager to cater to her every desire, had disappeared, replaced by debt collectors and auctioneers. The laughter and music that had once filled the halls were replaced by the hushed whispers of creditors and the clatter of moving vans. "This isn't fair," she'd shriek, her voice raw with panic. "I don't deserve this. It's all Elena's fault. She's the one who should be suffering." She raged internally, her thoughts a maelstrom of envy and resentment. She's the one who should be losing everything. But Elena, the sister she had always dismissed, the one she had ridiculed and belittled, was now living a life of luxury, her name whispered in the highest circles of power and wealth. Isabel, meanwhile, was drowning in debt, her reputation in tatters, her future uncertain. The social invitations dried up, the fawning friends disappeared, and the designers who had once clamored to dress her now turned their backs, their loyalty as fleeting as the trends she had so desperately tried to emulate. She was alone, adrift in a world that no longer recognized her, a fallen princess stripped of her crown and her kingdom. The consequences of her incompetence, her arrogance, her blind faith in her own superiority were finally catching up with her. "Daddy," she pleaded, her voice cracking with desperation. "You have to fix this. You have to make it all go away." But her father, his own world crumbling around him, had no answers, no solutions. He was a broken man, his spirit crushed by the weight of his own mistakes, his legacy tarnished by his daughter's incompetence. Isabel's implosion was a spectacle, a public display of the consequences of entitlement and unearned privilege. She was a cautionary tale, a reminder that the house of cards built on vanity and delusion could collapse at any moment. And as I watched her fall, I couldn't help but feel a flicker of satisfaction. It wasn't just about revenge, not anymore. It was about justice. It was about the restoration of balance, the righting of wrongs. It was about the triumph of the underdog, the rise of the forgotten daughter. Isabel's downfall was a necessary step in my own ascent. Her destruction paved the way for my own empire, my own legacy. And as I watched her fade into obscurity, I knew that my time had come. The man who stood before me was a ghost of his former self. Gone was the imperious CEO, the titan of industry who commanded boardrooms and brokered deals with the confidence of a king. In his place stood a shell, a man broken by his own hubris, his eyes hollow, his shoulders slumped, his voice a mere tremor of its former boom. "Elena," he croaked, his hand outstretched in a plea for mercy. I need your help." The arrogance was gone, replaced by desperation. He came crawling back, hoping I'd still be the dutiful daughter, ready to bail him out, to forgive and forget the years of neglect. Ultimate betrayal. He couldn't have been more wrong. I looked at him, my expression unreadable, my heart a block of ice. The years of resentment, the pain of his disownment, the memory of my lonely death, it all rose to the surface, a tidal wave of bitterness threatening to consume me. "Help?" I echoed, my voice laced with chilling indifference. "You want my help? The daughter you cast aside? The one you deemed worthless, a failure, a stain on the sterling name?" He flinched, his eyes darting away, unable to meet my gaze. "I made a mistake, Elena," he stammered, his voice cracking. "I was wrong. I see that now." Now, I thought, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. Now, when you have nothing left to lose. Now, when your precious Isabel has failed you. Isabel, her face contorted with a mixture of fury and disbelief, stood behind him, her eyes burning with resentment. "Daddy," she hissed, her voice laced with venom. "How can you beg her for help after what she did? After she stole everything from us?" "Stole?" I thought, my amusement growing. She still doesn't understand. She still thinks she's entitled to everything, even the consequences of her own actions. "Silence, Isabel," Victor snapped, his voice regaining a hint of its former authority. "This is between Elena and me." He turned back to me, his eyes pleading. "Elena, please," he begged. "I'll do anything. Name your price, just save us." I looked at them, at the broken man and the spoiled princess, their world crumbling around them, their pride shattered, their future uncertain. And in that moment I realized that my revenge was complete. They were already vanquished, defeated by their own arrogance and greed. "There's nothing left to save," I said, my voice cold and final. "You made your choice, Victor. Now you have to live with it." My father's pleas were a broken record, a litany of regret and remorse that echoed through the sterile confines of my office. He knelt before me, his once proud head bowed, his voice choked with emotion. "Elena, my darling girl," he sobbed, "please forgive me. I was blind, foolish. I didn't see your worth, your strength. I cast you aside like a fool, and now I'm paying the price." Isabel stood beside him, her face a mask of fury and disbelief. "Get up, Daddy," she hissed, her voice laced with contempt. "Don't grovel at her feet. She doesn't deserve your apologies." I watched them, my expression impassive, my heart a cold, hard stone. The years of neglect, the sting of his betrayal, the memory of my lonely death, it all swirled within me, a maelstrom of emotions that threatened to overwhelm me. But I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. I wouldn't let them see my pain, my anger, my vulnerability. I looked at him, at the man who had discarded me so easily, and felt nothing. He was a stranger, a relic of a life I no longer recognized. The father I had once longed for, the love I had craved, it was all gone, replaced by a vast emptiness, a chilling indifference. "Get up, Victor," I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. "Your theatrics are tiresome." He looked up, his eyes filled with a desperate hope that quickly faded as he met my gaze. "Elena, please," he begged, his voice cracking. "I'll do anything. Just tell me what you want. I'll give you anything." "Anything," I echoed, a flicker of amusement in my eyes. "Even your precious company? Even your legacy? Even your pride?" He hesitated, the offer dying on his lips. He couldn't bring himself to say the words, to admit his complete and utter defeat. Isabel, however, had no such qualms. "Don't you dare, Daddy!" she shrieked, her voice laced with panic. "Don't you dare give her anything. She doesn't deserve it." I ignored her, my focus solely on my father. "Well, Victor," I pressed, my voice like ice, "what's it going to be? Your pride or your survival?" He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of shame and desperation. He knew he had lost, knew that his empire, his legacy, was slipping through his fingers like sand. And he knew that I, the daughter he had discarded, was the one holding the hourglass, the one controlling his fate. I don't know," he mumbled, his voice barely a whisper. "Then you have nothing left to offer me," I said, my voice cold and final. "Leave, both of you. I have no more time for your pathetic pleas." They left, their departure a silent acknowledgement of their defeat. I watched them go, their backs slumped, their footsteps heavy with the weight of their regret. And as the door closed behind them, I felt a surge of triumph, a bittersweet victory over the family who had abandoned me, the family who had taught me the true meaning of indifference. The boardroom was a battleground, the air thick with tension and the scent of desperation. Victor Sterling, his face etched with lines of worry and defeat, stood before the assembled directors. "We need a solution," he pleaded, his eyes scanning the faces of the men and women who had once hung on his every word. "Sterling Industries is on the brink of collapse. We need a miracle." A nervous silence filled the room. The directors, once eager to align themselves with the Sterling name, now shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their eyes darting away, their confidence shaken. Then the doors burst open and I walked in. Heads turned, whispers erupted, and a collective gasp filled the room. I ignored them, my gaze fixed on my father, a smirk playing on my lips. "I believe I have a solution," I announced, my voice calm and confident, a stark contrast to the panic swirling around me. Victor stared at me, his eyes widening with surprise and a flicker of hope. "Elena," he croaked, his voice hoarse with disbelief. "What are you doing here?" "Saving the company, of course," I replied, my voice dripping with irony. "Or rather, what's left of it." I took a seat at the head of the table, the seat that had once been his, the seat that was rightfully mine. The directors, their faces a mixture of confusion and awe, watched me with newfound respect. "Victor," I said, my voice cutting through the silence, "you offered me a stake in the company, a lifeline you called it. To return to the fold, to reclaim my rightful place in the Sterling legacy." He nodded eagerly, his eyes filled with desperate hope. "Yes, Elena," he said, his voice trembling. "Anything. I'll give you anything you want. Anything." I echoed, my voice laced with amusement. "Even control? Even the power to dismantle everything you've built?" His face fell, the realization dawning on him. He thought he was offering me a lifeline. He didn't realize I was the one holding the scissors, ready to cut the cord. "You see, Victor," I continued, my voice rising, "I don't need your handouts. I don't need your scraps. I've built my own empire, my own fortune, and I've done it without you, without your name, without your legacy." I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. The directors, their eyes wide with shock, exchanged nervous glances. Victor, his face pale, looked like a man who had just been dealt a fatal blow. "I own the majority of Sterling Industries," I announced, my voice ringing through the room. I bought it piece by piece through shell companies and anonymous transactions. You were so busy clinging to your crumbling empire that you didn't even notice. A collective gasp filled the room. Victor stared at me, his mouth agape, his eyes filled with a mixture of horror and disbelief. Isabel, her face contorted with rage, let out a strangled cry. The takeover was complete. The Sterling Empire was mine, and I, Elena Sterling, the daughter they had discarded, was now the queen. The auctioneer's gavel fell with a resounding crack, each strike a hammer blow to my father's legacy. The Sterling Industries headquarters, once a symbol of their power and prestige, was now a sterile auction house, its walls lined with eager bidders, its air thick with the scent of greed and anticipation. Lot number 1, the auctioneer announced, his voice booming through the room. The Sterling Industries flagship building, a prime piece of real estate in the heart of the financial district. The bidding frenzy began, a whirlwind of raised hands and shouted numbers, each offer a nail in the coffin of my father's empire. I watched from the balcony, a silent observer, my face a mask of impassivity. Victor stood in the crowd, his face pale and drawn, his eyes filled with a mixture of horror and disbelief. Isabel clung to his arm, her sobs echoing through the room, her once flawless makeup streaked with tears. "No," she whimpered, her voice barely audible. "This can't be happening. Daddy, stop them." But there was nothing he could do. The empire he had built, the legacy he had cherished, was being dismantled before his eyes, piece by piece, sold to the highest bidder. Lot number 2, the auctioneer continued, his voice relentless. The Sterling Industries manufacturing plant, a state-of-the-art facility with a proven track record of success. The bidding war intensified, fueled by the desperation of rival companies, eager to capitalize on the Sterling downfall. I watched as familiar faces, CEOs of companies I had secretly supported, raised their hands, paddles, their eyes gleaming with triumph. Lot number 3, the auctioneer announced, his voice rising with excitement. The Sterling Industries patent portfolio, a treasure trove of intellectual property with the potential to revolutionize entire industries. The bids flew fast and furious, the price escalating with each passing moment. I saw the desperation in my father's eyes, the realization that his life's work, his legacy, was being sold off to strangers, his name erased from the annals of history. The auction was swift and brutal, each piece of their empire sold to the highest bidder, their name, their legacy reduced to rubble. By the time the last gavel fell, the Sterling Empire was no more. The once mighty conglomerate, the symbol of their wealth and power, had vanished, leaving behind only a hollow shell, a ghost of its former glory. I stood on the balcony overlooking the scene, a sense of closure washing over me. My revenge was complete. The auction hall was empty now, the echoes of the gavel and the frantic bidding fading into an eerie silence. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight filtering through the high windows, illuminating the emptiness where a dynasty had once stood. I walked away, my heels clicking on the marble floor, each step a resounding declaration of victory. Behind me, I heard my father's voice, a broken whisper, a desperate plea for recognition. "Elena, wait, please." His cries echoed in the empty halls, a pathetic symphony of regret. I didn't turn back. He was nothing to me, less than nothing. He had made his choice years ago when he chose Isabel over me, when he sacrificed me to protect his precious golden child. He had disowned me, discarded me, erased me from his life, and now he was reaping the consequences of his actions. I walked out into the sunlight, the city sprawling before me, a testament to human ambition and the relentless pursuit of power. But I was no longer a pawn in their game. I was a player, a force to be reckoned with, a woman who had risen from the ashes of their betrayal to build her own empire. The Sterling name, once a symbol of their dominance, was now a mark of their failure. Their legacy, their fortune, their pride, all reduced to dust. And I, Elena Sterling, the daughter they had cast aside, was the one who had brought them down. I hailed a cab, the driver's eyes widening in recognition as I gave him my destination. The Sterling mansion. Once a symbol of their wealth and power, it was now just another address, a fading memory of a life I had left behind. As the car pulled up to the gates, I saw them standing on the steps, their figures silhouetted against the setting sun. Victor, his shoulders slumped, his face etched with despair. Isabel, her eyes red-rimmed, her once proud posture broken. They watched as I stepped out of the car, my head held high, my eyes filled with a cold, hard determination. I did not acknowledge them. I didn't offer a word of comfort or condemnation. They were irrelevant ghosts of a past I had finally conquered. I walked past them, heels clicking on the pavement, the sound of a final punctuation mark on their downfall. The gates closed behind me, shutting them out, shutting them off, erasing them from my life. I was Elena Sterling, the untouchable, the woman who had risen from the ashes, the one who had played the game and won. As I walked away from the ruins of their empire, I knew that my future was limitless, my power absolute. The Sterling name was dead. Long live Elena Sterling.